Well, today's episode, we're covering something a little bit more heavy. So trigger warnings, we are going to talk about death. We're going to talk about sudden death. We're talking about suicide, all of those things. But we really felt like this was an important episode to do because we did go through a year-long period where we experienced 5 very major deaths within our church body. And I hope we've done justice up until this point of establishing just how it was ingrained in us that we are a family. And so even though these were people that you went to church with, you really did feel like a member of your family died. And so we're going to discuss how that affected each of us individually, but even more importantly, we want to discuss how death and these like tragic events were handled just in general at Come As You Are.
Faith can feel like hearts and butterflies until someone lights a match and burns it all to the ground. Welcome to the Burning Butterflies podcast.
The sad thing is that there's abuse of every kind within the church. But the spiritual abuse is the stuff that just
It's a place there shouldn't be abuse. Like, there just shouldn't be abuse in a place that claims Jesus.
Well, it ruins your soul. If you're new here, we suggest listening to our prologue episode first. This is the story of 2 women's journey through spiritual abuse and escaping from toxic church culture while finding hope in Christ.
Sometimes it's just the facts, and if you get offended by it, that's a you issue. And if we can't be mature enough to have these conversations, even if some of the topics are difficult, then shame on us.
When something bad happens, naturally you question God and you question why. And those are all very normal, natural questions that people have. But when the way you react to tragedy is tied to your faith and tied to your relationship with God, it is impossible to know how you're going to react to something until you experience it. And then to have that called into question, I think is extra hurtful. But we start off, we are in September of 2014, and there is a family in our church, and the mom tragically passes away in a car accident. And so this is kind of the first big major death, a sudden death for Come As You Are. We have had older people in the church body pass away leading up to this, but this was very sudden and it was very tragic.
I think you brought up a very valid point. Like, there's this normal level of things that happen. You know, people get old, people pass away. Churches are known for what? Weddings and funerals, and there's the natural course of life, and I'm not making light of it and saying that it's not anymore like devastating to family and whatever, but there's like this normal progression of life where you get old and you pass away, and churches handle that, with grace and precision. But we're going to talk about deaths that were unexpected, younger people, like tragedy, like tragic things that they're the type of things that you aren't planning for, expecting, and ultimately you really feel like they shouldn't happen.
Funeral for this mom happens, and it is expected that we are going to put together a slideshow for this family. And this is where I don't know that funeral homes will do this for people. And so this is just becomes an expectation that this is something that the church does. And the only person that's able to do something like that in the time frame that's needed is me. And so this is before we have easy ways to share things digitally like we do now. I have people bringing me actual pictures of this lady, and I'm having to scan them all in. But then, because at Come As You Are, we have policies. There's no drugs, there's no drinking, there's no, you can't have shirts with like inappropriate images on them. There's no cursing, all of these things. There's all of these rules and regulations that come around using the building. And so I have to go through and Photoshop pictures where it's not even anything terrible, but like if she was at dinner with her friends and they were having drinks and they all took a group picture together, I have to Photoshop the drinks. And some of them were easy. I could just crop it out. But some of them, like I was having to turn like beer cans into Coke cans because it needed to have an appearance of like
their life their life needed to be fixed even after the fact.
But
Come As You Are, we'll fix that.
Yeah, exactly. Even after you're dead.
And if not, we'll just Photoshop it.
Yeah. So I'm doing this and I'm working at the front desk in the office, and because the family wanted certain songs, and I hear Tom playing this song, and I'm like, and I can't even remember what it was because they had a few different ones. I think it was a Tupac song. But there was definitely a radio edit, and then there was a explicit version, and Tom starts playing this song, and I said, "Is that for the slideshow?" And he said, "Yeah," because he was having to like buy the song and download it off of iTunes. And I no more, and I mean, he has it turned way up, right? Like I can hear it at the front of the office. His office is in the back. And I realize what song it is, and I'm like, make sure it's the clean version. And he goes, what? And about that time, like F-bombs and all of this go. And I mean, it's loud, and there's other people in the office. And I thought this old lady was just going to like have a heart attack because she was in the office dropping stuff off. And he had no idea. Like, why would someone give me a song with cursing in it? Like, why would you want that at your funeral? And then I got to sit and listen to like a 10-minute lecture on why this is why you should just have hymns and Christian music, and you should really just have the worship team do your music selection for your funeral, because why would you want this?
Because people have real lives,
exactly. Yeah, but I just
and they enjoy things that aren't, coated in Kool-Aid.
Yeah, but he like the fact that there's two versions of music. There is a clean version that they play on the radio, and then there is the real version of the song, and that he never had heard of that before, and it just blew his mind. So this mom passes away. She left little kids behind. She left a husband, a family. It is a very large family in the community. So even beyond just the walls of Come As You Are, they were a huge family in the community. And the church's overall reaction is support. This is in September. And so as we're moving into the fall, it becomes apparent these kids are going to have holidays without their mom, and it's going to be really difficult. And so people started donating money, from the church body. People would donate money to the church for this family, and it was intended to help the dad and the grandma be able to help support these kids and kind of find a new level of normalcy. The church would collect the money, and then they would write a check to this family. But the part that was super weird, which I don't even know if you ladies know, this is what was going on behind the scenes, but we were having to go over to the grandma's house, because the grandma, they were all living with the grandma. And so we would have to go over there and give them their check every month, but then essentially question them on whether or not they were using the money for the kids or like what they were using the money for, which I thought was really weird because like the way giving worked at Come As You Are was Tom would be like, well, why do you need to know where the money's going? You give it to God and you need to trust that God is going to show us how to use the money. And we've done an episode on that before of giving in the church. And so it was so bizarre to me.
I just think it's interesting because like, so when that happened, like Pastor Tom, Charlotte, Froggy, myself, and Pastor Old Reliable, like we're all at the hospital, like while that was going on. And I will say, like, honestly, like when you have someone who has had an experience of losing a parent like Pastor Tom, I will say that 100% hands down, he handled that situation in the hospital with those kids like top notch, 100%. Like you could not have, and I felt in the moment, like you couldn't have asked for somebody better to be there for these young kids than somebody who understood what it was like to lose a parent. And the words that he spoke to them and things like that, like it was very impactful, very powerful. And it's like you get that fuzzy, warm feeling from that. And then I don't know that like, I feel like from my perspective, I felt that the church as a whole was doing something and making an impact. And if I participated in the church, that somehow I was vicariously making an impact through the church. And so I understand why people would like give money and they're like trying to help. I'm not saying we're just throwing money at it like so it'll go away. I feel like people think that if they participate in the church, that they are participating in whatever the church is participating in. But the truth is, the church is haphazardly just throwing a check at these people, but nobody's really doing any real groundwork.
Well, and I forgot about that because I don't even know this mom. And when I come to the church for service, I think someone else has passed away because I'm still new enough. I don't quite know who everyone is. And so I'm confused the whole service and I'm like trying to figure out who's passed away. But what's weird is it changes hands of who goes to the house with the check. And there will become a point in time where I go to the house with the check. And you did have like weird conversations and you'd kind of be seeing what was going on and almost like a CPS call.
And that's really interesting because like I didn't know you went to the house because I mean we gave money to this family for years. Like people would donate money to this family for years.
I think up till COVID.
Yeah, but I went once and it was such an awkward, uncomfortable feeling. It was probably, I think I went like at the beginning of November, probably around that time, because there were talks of like getting them on the list for Thanksgiving basket and upcoming Christmas stuff and all of that. But I went with another lady and it just felt so like we were invading not their privacy, but like I felt like I was violating them. Like they had gone through this tragedy and they had gone through this horrible thing. And here I am, like some church lady who shows up and like we want verification that they're using the money we're giving them in a appropriate way. Like it made me feel so disgusting that I just made up excuses when I was like, asked like, hey, can you go? I just was like, oh, I have to do this or I'm not able to. And then eventually I just stopped being asked.
It's like CPS. So I was friends with two of the aunts of the families. So later on, but this is years, like 3 years down the road, I will go to lunch with the girls in the family who lost their mom. I will and it's different for me when I go to the grandmas. I sit at the table and I just act like myself, and I'm like, oh, you got cookies, I want this, whatever. And then it just becomes like a normal, I'm another kid in her house, I'm another relative that has showed up. And because I'm friends, it's not as awkward for me as it was for Amanda. And because I know I'm like good friends, I know what's happening in the family, and if they need help with something, I'm able to help them get outside services with certain things.
Well, and I think that's a really important thing to point out here is that, like, if you were just sitting at church and you knew this family in our church body had experienced this tragedy, the way it was billed from stage, from Tom and Charlotte individually, one-on-one, it was billed that, like, our church is helping this family directly. Like, we are doing all of these things, when in reality, like, the kids were in school. The school district jumped in and helped that family. The local rec center.
Coaches.
Yep, the local rec center, because this family was very involved in the rec center. The mom had been a coach for various sports at the rec center. They jumped in and they offered a bunch of resources. And so we were, like you said, Melissa, like, you feel like you're participating in something bigger and more amazing, when in reality, it's just a bunch of people going over there with a check and being like, can we make sure that you spend this on the kids and not on yourself? When, like, that's not what the grandma was doing. Like, just the level of, like, presumption.
Right. Well, I think it's funny because it's the contingencies and the strings. And I think that's what I was like most frustrated with looking at this situation in particular, is like, those kids have like just rose like champs, you know, like just watching them grow up throughout the community and stuff, and just being like so impressed with them and seeing the things that they've accomplished is amazing. And then going like, gosh, we all could have done so much more and done what we're called to do. And I just come to this realization that we spend so much time as Christians like being all about church that we miss all the things that God has really called us to. So that's my 2 cents on that.
I think that's a huge testimony to these kids, because they have grown into phenomenal teenagers and young adults. And I mean, not just like, oh yeah, like, hey, this kid graduated high school. It's like, no, this kid graduated high school with honors and got scholarships, and like, just above and beyond well-rounded human beings. And I think that is a huge testament to the fact that this grandma was like, no, I'm going to do what's best for my grandkids, and I'm going to make sure that they are getting the help that they need.
Yeah, which is great. And it's just unfortunate that like an organization, you know, like a church would bill it as like, and maybe not even specifically to this situation, but I think it's definitely in the narrative of Come As You Are, of like the state systems, like the church is supposed to be the place where you get all your help. Like, there shouldn't be welfare. It should be the church taking care of the poor and needy. Like, I feel like Christians believe that, but yet fall so short on like actually doing it.
Well, people were very happy to give in the beginning. And then there were certain people that said, I will give this amount every month. Well, after a certain point in time, people get tired of doing that. So then the check wouldn't come in. And no one wants to make that call of where's the check for this family. So we would just let it go. So then if you were in the office and tithes were tight and we have to pay this family, that's when Pastor Tom would get mad and start, you know, because I was called into his office and had to sit across from him while he said, why, this family's a huge family. Why aren't any of these other people stepping up? Why is the church having to do this? Where's their community and their family? You're supposed to take care of your family first, which was very unfair to the family because they didn't ask for us to give them money. We set that up on, like, the church did that. People wanted to help because you want to do that in this type of situation. And the easiest way to do that is to write a check. And when the checks dried up, that's when it became a problem. But also, the community really did step in for this family as a whole. So they had, like, the community, the school system, and the church helping. Because as we go on with this, there's another family that it doesn't turn out like this.
Yeah. So that brings up the next family. In November of 2014, a dad in the church commits suicide. And it was something that for us, I think at church, it was very shocking. But then it kind of came to light that like in his family, it really wasn't shocking and that he had struggled with depression for a very, very long time. And was not getting the help that he needed. So that mom that had passed away in the car accident, she served in children's ministry. This dad served in children's ministry. And so we have two people who worked in the same classroom pass away within just a couple months of each other. And for the poor lady who was the lead of that classroom, this was devastating for her. She really struggled with this a lot. And this particular family, Brandi, you had the most interaction with this family.
This happened we moved the kids up in August during this time. And so this has just happened. So the little girl is in my class. And so I've had her maybe 4 Sundays. That's all I know of her. And I'm still relatively new to the church. And this happens. And I don't think I'm even told until like I get there on Sunday. Everyone just expects I'm going to know how to handle this. There's no like talk of what we're doing, what we're going to do for the kids. Like, it's just Jesus has it. He has them.
Okay. So like that's such a valid point though. Like there's no training in how to deal with this ever.
Like in a normal, healthy church situation who would have training, there's just no training at Come As You Are, but those people are nowhere to be seen. It is put on a volunteer once a week Sunday school teacher to know how to handle this.
Right. This child's 5.
Right. Like that's insane to me. Okay. So I even think about like training, like to be in schools, you know, like we all work in schools. And so like as a preschool teacher, as a substitute teacher, like I've had training on how to deal with things every year. And granted, I understand that a lot of it is like mandatory reporter training and stuff like that. But when I was working at a Christian school, like there was other training on like there's things that come up and how you handle things and a chain of command and who you go to. And there's systems and processes in place for dealing with sensitive subjects. And it just blows my mind. And I know that we've been up and down all the things that could be, should be, would be, and why we think that it was such a mess. But I think I just absolutely am just right now realizing the lack of training at this church. Because we were trained how to say in 5 verses that you need to accept Jesus as your Lord and Savior all the time. But I'm sorry, when you have a 5-year-old whose dad just passed away, saying that, well, sweetie, you know, all fall short of the glory, or all have sinned and fall short of the glory. It's not it's not going to cut it. So.
Oh, no, that is such a valid point because we are rapidly approaching the point where Brandi and I will take over children's ministry. We will be asked to lead children's ministry. And that is one of the first things that we implement is some sort of training, or at least a like, hey, if this happens, here are people that you can call that, you know, that can come in and talk to you or talk to the kids and things like that, because we didn't want that to happen to the volunteers that were serving under us, because Brandi completely got thrown under the bus of like, welp, you know Jesus. And I mean, I'm not exaggerating. These are exact words. that would come out of Tom's mouth. You know Jesus. Only Jesus can help people. Do you not think that God will not give you the words that you need to say in those moments? Like, why do we need to have another human tell you what to say? Why would God not work?
Don't you think that Jesus will tell my surgeon how to operate?
Exactly.
Well, thank goodness God created Amazon, because the preschool teacher and I Googled how to help grieving children with Jesus. And we ordered a kit, because we love a kit at Come As You Are. 3 easy steps to overcome childhood grief, or whatever it was. It was a monster thing. It was actually really cute. It's really good, but they needed more, because we basically just read it as a story. We saw them for a short amount of time every week, and prior to this, I don't believe they were there weekly either. And so the funeral's planned. I'm not part of any of that. The preschool teacher and I decide we will go to the funeral together, and it's at Come As You Are. And so we come in, and we are going to sit in the back of the sanctuary together, to kind of stay out of the way. I mean, the place is packed. And the funeral director comes up and says, it's been requested by the family that you're going to take the children up to say goodbye to their dad. And so we kind of look at each other like, what?
Was this
and
like,
so
this was not like asked ahead of time, like in the moment, and
in the moment.
So to be clear, like just for our listeners, a funeral director is someone from the funeral home that is coming into the church and is kind of acting like an event coordinator almost. And but their job is to make sure that the deceased person is handled with dignity and everything goes the way that the family wants it to go. And so the church and the funeral home work very closely together. So this should have been something that was discussed ahead of time.
Well, and I don't know why it was decided. I don't think the mom decided it, because the mom is barely coherent, which is understandable.
Yeah.
And so we just kind of look at each other, but we're, like, okay, it is what it is. So we go sit in the front row with the family. So now we are in the front row with the family for the entire service. And it would be one thing if, like, we'd been with these kids for years and years and there's a real relationship there, but this is also important too. We are made to think that this is a real deep relationship. But in reality, the school year's just started. This is a new relationship for the 2 younger kids, for both of us, for the preschool teacher and I. And the oldest child is now in elementary school, and he was with the preschool teacher, but it's been years. So we don't have this ultra close relationship with these kids like it's being portrayed. And so after everyone gets up and talks, and then it's time to say goodbye, basically. And so they want the kids to go first. And I don't believe the kids were front loaded either with this is what they were going to do. And so I think what happened, Pastor Tom had finished, and the funeral director came up and said, all right, we're going to let the family go first, and then if you want to say your goodbyes, because it's an open casket. And so then he calls us up with the kids, and we have to go up there and with them. And it just, I barely got next to the casket, just because, I had this tiny 5-year-old who's overwhelmed because this place is packed to the brim with people. She has all these people coming up to her prior to this. Her dad is gone. I don't think she fully grasped what's going on. And honestly, I'm glad that she was really too short to see into the casket. And so I don't really even like take her up there. We like kinda, and we just do it real quick and take them out of the sanctuary. And it just was it was so poorly thought out.
I think this whole situation was very poorly thought out, or lack of thought out, like this whole entire situation.
And you have to remember too, with the funeral directors, they're not putting any thought into this. You're paying for a service. So if you say, we want to put a bottle of tequila on grandma's casket and have everyone take a shot, they will say, okay, let's do that. They will do whatever you ask as long as it's not
illegal.
Yes.
Yeah.
So the funeral director is going to do whatever is asked. And, if you want to set a baby on top of the corpse and take a picture, they'll do that. It's crazy, but you get very desensitized too when you start doing these things. So it was just odd, weird, and it was my first experience of fly by the seat of your pants, but this time it's not to hang up decorations for an event. These are people's lives.
Yeah.
That we're dealing with.
Well, and I think also to look at it, like, we're looking at this with the big picture, right? And you and this other teacher were put in this situation. This wrecked that other teacher. She told several people, like, she hated this. This was awful. It was like she had bad dreams from it, like all of this stuff. You took it like a champ. And so guess who was asked to help with funerals and stuff in the future? Just the fact that because you were not the stereotypical emotional woman, you're able to turn it off and you're able to just power through. The amount of stuff that was required and asked of you was ridiculous. And it all started with a ridiculous request in the first place.
Right. Because I could put it in a box and, like, there's no emotion. Which is what Tom needed that.
Yeah. So we handle these two people and their deaths
Not very well.
Not well at all.
Like the second one, like, we just did such an awful job with that family. Like,
you have to remember the first family, there's a huge extended family. There's ties to Froggy in the family. There's ties to Pastor Tom. The aunts serve. They are very visual in the body. The second family, they will come 6 weeks in a row. We won't see them for 3 to 4 months.
Yeah.
So that's a big difference.
yeah.
So this all goes down, and I think collectively, hindsight's 2020. We all can agree that, like, the way this was handled was just an absolute ridiculous crap show. But in that moment, it was almost like you sit back and you're like, well, praise God Brandi was there for those kids, and praise God, that we have people who are wanting to give financially to this family. Like, you're so caught up in that, and it's everything's surrounding this death and tragedy all has to be like lacquered with a Jesus sticker, and we have to always like, well, praise God, and like, this is just, we are so blessed to be able to come alongside and help this family. When, if you really think about that phrase right there, I am blessed to come alongside of a family who has faced tragedy, a spouse who has lost their spouse unexpectedly, children who have lost their parent unexpectedly, and I am blessed. I'm highly favored by God to be able to help you, even though I have no training, I have no experience. So whether it's writing a check or Brandi, did you feel blessed to walk those kids up to the casket?
Honestly, I never felt blessed.
No, and I think it comes down to more of like, we might not understand here, but we will one day in eternity.
Yeah.
And God's got a bigger purpose. And I'm not saying any of that, like, it's not that any of this stuff isn't necessarily or fundamentally or at some level like that there's truth in this greater greatness, but that doesn't help in reality. Like, how you come alongside somebody who's suffering and how you deal with these things, that stuff is actually very counterproductive. And we do a huge disservice to everybody. And it's not even just in these tragic situations. It is everyday life. It's how we handle everyday life with each other. And we all face this as women. We have this unrealistic, idealistic that we're supposed to be meeting because, well, we're supposed to have this abundant life above and beyond, and it's going to be great. And this is what God has promised. But I also have to walk through the muck of this world, and I'm really not happy with it. And there's things in my life that I'm not happy with, and I'm being told to suck it up and that God has got it. These poor families who suffer these tragedies, and the person that they have to blame is God. You know, and then you have all of these people. We have a huge epidemic in our country of people who have a problem with God because they've been hurt by church and by people who say that they know and are speaking for God. And they're doing a very crappy job at it. And especially in situations like this, because you don't have training.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing with trying to counsel people in addiction. You don't have addiction training, but we can have a Bible study about it, and you do more harm than good. You do more harm than good to people who have suffered the most extravagant loss that they're ever going to suffer, and you're actually causing more harm. And I, had connection with both of these families and both of these situations, and even the next few coming on. But like, I felt so bad. Like, there are things that were done, I know, outside of what the church did from a few people and myself individually for like the second family because the church handled it so poorly. Like, you go at night and day difference. Like, I felt in one situation, like, by contributing to the church, I was contributing to this family and I was a part of something and we were doing good things. And with the other one, I mean, they left and nobody ever talked about them again. And it was just, and if they did, it wasn't even good. And then like, you're going to talk bad about these people whose behavior at the time or the way that they reacted to things. They're going through the most difficult time of their life and they didn't act perfectly and you're going to shame them for it. Like, that's not acceptable. These people are hurting and they have needs and they need things.
Yeah. The three of us have had like a connection to these first, couple deaths. But I think probably the hardest one for me personally was in February of 2015. The young couple who I had handed youth group over to, this couple that I called my friends, they died in a very tragic accident.
Yeah.
And that, I think that was the hardest one for me through all of this. And it's crazy because, again, it's this, Melissa and I have come to realize that we were kept apart in a lot of situations, but to see it in a way where you and I should have really, I don't even know how, I don't want to say this in a way that sounds like,
no, like you and I are
like
as both connected to this situation as we could be.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I worked every single day with the young man of the couple, right? Like, every single day. I worked at the same place. We worked together. Like, we played Clash of Clans every day on our phone. Everybody in the office, we played the game on our phones, Clash of Clans. It was fun. We had little tournaments. We had like, you talk crap to each other all day long at work, but, and then you get home from work, like, you see what I did last night? Yeah, that's right. I took out your army, like, we were like close, and you were friends, and you were close, and you lived your lives with these people.
Yeah.
But yet when these kind of things happen, you think that people all come together and build this united front, but yet you and I never associated with each other through this.
No.
And other people were told to do things that you would have typically thought of. Like, I just was weird how it was managed and it was handled.
Yeah.
Those are the only two words I can think of how this situation went through the church.
Yeah. When we got the phone call that day, when they were found, my husband called me, and I was walking into our kids' preschool to go pick them up. And I had an absolute breakdown. And I don't know if this was like God or just like a crazy coincidence, but that lady who came to Agency D3 VBS that we were all told was Brandi's friend, and her and Brandi came together, and it was really just a mom who wanted to like be at VBS with her kid. She took her kid to the same preschool as my kids. And she was the one who was like, are you okay? Because like, I'm trying to check my kid out of preschool. I'm clearly like, I'm crying. I'm on the phone. I'm trying to just like get them checked out so I can leave as fast as possible. And she's like, are you okay? Do you need anything? And I just like had a complete breakdown right there in the lobby of the preschool. But then I was told, because the church had called my husband called me, and he said, they don't need you to come to the church. In fact, they don't want you to. You need to take the leader of children's ministry. You need to take her kids so she can go to the church. And like at the time, I chalked it up to like, okay, that's just what's needed and all of that. And I spent a lot of years like feeling really selfish that hurt my feelings. And I felt like stupid that would hurt my feelings. But like my husband went and was there for this family and for our friends, but yet I wasn't allowed to be there.
Right. And not even like not allowed, like you were told.
I was,
not wanted.
I was flat out
like
told.
My friends have died, and then I was told like, you can't be here because you're not wanted here.
Yeah.
Like that's messed up.
Yeah. I was told, do not come.
Yeah.
Especially when other people who have just shown up are there too.
Yeah.
So then that really messes with your head. It's because we are saying like your family, and I mean, you are very close with this family, but then you're treated as you're not family. So
Yeah.
it's just a messed up mind.
Well,
F word.
oh no, absolutely.
No, and I get it. You feel bad saying like my feelings were hurt when these people were suffering something more tragic. But like, let's be real. Like, because that's where we talk about the hard things, because this is humanity and this is human nature. And you have friends and people that you consider not just friends, but family.
Yeah.
And something tragic happens, and it happened to you too. You're not so far removed. Like, it's one thing if you have like a whole bunch of people calling and you have like somebody that you've never met and they're like, do you need anything? No, you're fine. Don't come by. We're good. We have a lot of people here. But we're talking about like the core center, inner like costal of people. And these were your friends, and you were friends with the mom. And this is like, so yeah, it's okay to say in that moment, my feelings were hurt because I was pushed aside when you had a genuine heart to help because of your relationship and love for this family.
Well, and it goes even beyond that, because like I've had conversations with the family, like now that we've all left the church, and we all have had a chance to like clear our head and get away from the Kool-Aid. It was like, they've said like, it was weird that you weren't there. And honestly, like it seemed hurtful to them that I wasn't there.
Yeah.
And really the only thing that I was allowed to participate in, because they were leading a youth group, we had to tell the youth kids. And so because I had just stepped out, just a little bit before that, I knew several of the kids who were in youth group. And so I was asked to go and be there to tell the kids. But even then, like, we're there, but it was all Tom. Like, Tom stood on stage. Weird. And Tom,
that was a weird situation.
Tom stands there and like this is a tragic, horrible accident. And Tom stands on stage in front of these teenagers who, for several of them, this is their first experience with death ever, and says, this guy thought he was invincible, and that's why he's dead. And so don't think that you're invincible.
Yeah.
And all of us were just like,
it was awful.
What the hell was that? And like,
yeah.
I remember like pulling some girls aside, and they were really upset by what Tom said. And I just said, like, well, just ignore what he said. And like, you know, we're just going to like pretend that didn't happen. And
well, here's like, this is what he must have meant. No, it was the most awkward, like, situation as an adult in that situation and being there. Like that whole thing, it's like one of those, the curtain is pulled away and you actually see reality for a moment and your brain can't rationalize what's going on because you're like, that's not okay. And something about this isn't right. But you don't know how to even like process it within the context of this tragic event that you're so close to.
Yeah.
And that was like, I just really want to hit that point home. Like how messed up, not just even that sentence, but everything he said was so messed up.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous.
And then Charlotte flat out told me, like, we have the funeral covered. We don't need your help. We don't need you to do anything. We have it all covered. And my job was to babysit kids. Like, I had my kids and I had the children's ministry leaders' kids, and that was my job. But the family asked me to intervene because there was a lady, and like she had good intentions. She wanted to do something to commemorate, memorialize this couple. But it is very common in the Hispanic community that when someone passes away, they do an airbrush portrait on a t-shirt with the people's names, and it says like rest in peace or rest in paradise and stuff. And she wanted to make these t-shirts. And the mom of the guy was like, came to me and she's just like, I can't walk into church and see my kids' faces on people's t-shirts. Like, I can't handle that right now. And so I was allowed to intervene and redirect this woman. And we ended up making the rubber bracelets. But I think the only reason I was allowed to do that was because like Amanda will tell her no. And if that woman thinks Amanda's a giant bitch, then like it doesn't matter. And so I was allowed to do that because I was allowed to tell someone no. And
we needed some muscle.
Yeah. Yeah. But Melissa, you were a big part of this family. Like you said, you worked with them and you knew them. They were friends with you as well.
Yeah, because Froggy and I, this is the company that Froggy and I worked. We worked with that family in the church when we worked together. So this is during that time, and I'm being isolated, allowing myself to be isolated. So my only friends are like the mom and the sister. Yeah. So something that we discovered while we were, timelining our lives in a cult, and it's there's just certain questions that like everybody should ask always, like what's the end game and why do people lie when they don't need to lie, right? And so I think the biggest thing that came up for this, and actually all of the tragedies that happened, especially in this 1 year, like you think we would have gotten better or something, or decided that we needed training, or like, it's funny how we can look at this and even in the moment know that we're not doing things right, but the leadership of Come As You Are thinks they're doing everything perfectly and listening to God and doing exactly. And if we didn't do it, it's because God didn't tell us to. And that's just such a poor excuse for like mismanagement that I've ever heard of. But it's interesting to me in all of these scenarios, like how things are handled. And I said, like, this situation particularly was managed. It was managed.
Yes.
And like different stories were told to different people and different outcomes. And like it was so quickly swept under the rug. Like this poor family was forced and made to just like rationalize and get through it and push it aside. And ultimately, I think that did so much damage to them. And they fit the narrative so well. Like they did a great job. They honestly, I mean, it's an awful trophy to get, but if you had to have a picture of people who went through tragedy and kept their faith and still followed Jesus, they were picture perfect. You know, did the journey look like that? No. And if they sat down and talked with them, they'd be like, that was a load of crap is what it was. We were dying. Literally, we were dying inside and there was nobody to help us. And we were just being told by the people who were supposed to help us that we needed to put on a shiny face. And that's a tragedy. And I think that's the biggest point in all of this. But like something that came up is, like I said, this kid and everybody that we worked with, we played this game, Clash of Clans. And there was like a huge blow up at work. Like, I mean, it's a family business. You have disagreements, right? And so, but it was one of those things where every once in a while, like there would just be like these butting of heads of like, no, this is how things are supposed to be. No, I want to do it this way. No, you're wrong. No, this. And so it was like a Friday or whatever day it was. And there was like this argument. And so the workday ended in kind of a like, not talking to you. Like, this is just ridiculous, right? And so we all thought that this young man had just not been playing the video game because he needed some time. Like he was taking time with his wife and they would do this. They would go out of town sometimes, or they would just like have home, like staycations. Mm-hmm. And so we didn't think anything of it, you know, and we didn't talk to him much over the weekend and then eventually not at all. But it was really weird when we all got to work on Monday and he wasn't at work. And it was like, has anybody heard from him? No, he hasn't been on Clash of Clans. Like it was unusual. And it was so unusual that we agreed within the office that we were like, okay, we need to find out where he is. Like, it's like, you just get this overwhelming sense of like, you're like, something's not right. And so, but then you bring into question, what do you do and how do you do it? And, you know, the whole time it's like, you know, in the pit of your gut that something's wrong, but you're hopeful on the upper level of like, I don't want there to be anything wrong. And like, it's just crazy. But just being a part of that and in that circle, like the reality of these tragedies is very well known. But it's funny how like the stories that come out later, or the stories that were told, the narratives, like it's like a prepared speech. Like, this is what we're going to say happened. And none of it ends up being, it's like there's like so many few people who know the truth. And I feel like that even like in this context of this, I bet there's listeners on this podcast who are like, that's not really what happened. They don't know.
100%.
Yeah. Well,
because we only know our version.
Because right now you're telling me a story that I never heard.
Yeah.
I heard a completely different story, and I didn't even really know these people. And when I find out what's happened, I'm at the grocery store and someone comes up hysterical saying they've passed away, and I don't even really, it doesn't even click. And I call Amanda and say, I'll come get your kids right now, because I know how close Amanda is with the family. And she says, oh no, it's fine, which I thought was weird. And then later on, which is probably 8 hours later, I'm told a completely different story of how everyone finds out they passed away. So it's just kind of weird.
Well, and I think
that's what makes you lose your mind in this place.
Yeah. Well, and like, I'm sure our listeners, like, you're being vague. Like, yes, we are being vague. They died in an accident, and that's all we're going to say about that, because that's not our place. That's not our story to tell. But it goes beyond just like what is the version of the story that gets put out there publicly. It's also like you said, like people are inserting themselves saying like I was there when like the family, I stood in the driveway like way they were trying to get in their house, and like it is this weird paradox that you see over and over and over again at Come As You Are, of everyone is almost like desperate to be a part of what is going on, that you want to be there every time the door is open. You want to be serving and everything. You want to go to every event. And when something like this happens, you have to find a way to insert yourself into the story. Otherwise, it's almost like you aren't as...
You're not in the in crowd.
Yeah, you're not
important.
Yeah.
Well, and I mean, like, there were definitely, like, in the time of, like, I know that calls were made like to the church, and then the church called people to go and be with the family. Like the management of like just take a minute and think about this. Like you're in the middle of a tragedy, and the first people that you call is the church. And then the church dispenses its little army of minions to come and manage your situation.
And
like there's something about that that's creepy to me.
So you were at the hospital with the mom who passed away in a car accident and her family. Tom was there. Why was Tom not with this family? Why was Tom not the one standing in the driveway? Why was Pastor Old Reliable not the one standing in the driveway? He's on like the team where you...
I don't know. It was a Monday. It was day off.
Go and visit people. Like, but that's the asinine thing. Why was the children's ministry volunteer teacher the one to take the kids up to the casket? Why are we calling random people to go and handle these things and put them into situations where the people that were called probably felt ill-equipped and felt just like... You're supposed to be there to provide support for this family, and you have no training, and you have no, like, you don't know what's going to happen. And then you're just as emotional. Like, I mean, we're
just racking up people under the bus, basically.
Yeah.
Just victims under the tire.
Why are we continuing in this cycle over and over again? And you said something earlier, Melissa, that was just so like, like Tom thought he handled all of these situations wonderfully. Like,
perfectly.
And we get to the last death in the summer of 2015, and a young guy, I mean, he's like my age, he passes away suddenly of a heart attack, and he has a teenage daughter. And Tom sits in the office, and I know because I was in the office, and you know, Tom is in there talking to this girl and her grandparents and her stepmom and all of these things. And Tom basically tells this girl, like, if you ever want to be with your dad again, because your dad was saved, your dad was baptized, like, if you ever want to be with your dad again, you need to be saved, you need to be baptized. And leverage this girl's dad's death in order to put another towel
for the kingdom.
Yeah, and look, we baptized her, and he stood on stage and bragged about that crap for weeks. You know, like, oh, she saw her need for Jesus in that moment. No, she didn't. She had a man who is supposed to be helping her through the hardest time of her life. And like you said, Melissa, like, you would have thought that would have been the perfect person to come alongside of someone who had lost a parent, because Tom lost both of his parents. And you would have thought like it would have been so great, but like he guilt tripped this girl basically into accepting Jesus because she was devastated that her dad had died suddenly, and she wanted to have hope that she would see him again someday.
Let's be real. It's multi-level marketing. So he may not do it all the time, but I watched him do the same thing to a young family that lost a 1-year-old child suddenly. And since Pastor Tom had also lost a child, like, because I'm sorry, that's the worst. That is the absolute worst thing that can happen. He came out of his office saying that they both accepted Jesus, and he says that to me, and then he turns to Amanda and says, call them and schedule baptisms. And
why they're planning the funeral of their infant.
Right. And this is exactly the, oh my gosh, the complete and absolute
in consideration for human people.
Yeah. And when we talk about the tactics that are used to manipulate people, that high control organization, cults, toxic organizations use, the number one people they prey upon are people who are in a place of dysregulation, which means that something tragic has happened. And I'm sorry, but we all know what it's like to be in a situation, and you don't know up from down, left from right. You don't know what you're doing, what you're agreeing to, what you're saying. Like, I've worked with people in these, and they're just like, can't make a decision. I don't care. Put pink, put green. You know, when you're talking about like food or flowers or a thing, when you deal with people who experienced this sudden loss, and especially unexpected, they don't know what they're saying, what they're agreeing to, what's left, what's right. They're in a daze in a fog, most likely.
Right.
You know, well, and then to take advantage of that.
Right. So then we baptize them. We have a funeral, we baptize them. They show up for a few weeks. This haunts me. Most things do not haunt me. This haunted me. It was what we put the mom through that bothered me the most. Like, the baby dying and all that was horrific, but I could like put that in a nice little box and wrap it up. But the mom haunted me because when she came out of the office and he tells me, then he looks at Amanda and I look at each other like, this crosses a line. And we talked about it after, but then we both like had to sell it to each other. And for years, I stalked this mom on Facebook, and then I ended up finding at baseball, of all places, that she was friends with a mom that Amanda and I knew because of baseball. So then, like the crazy person, I would pump her for information about this family because it bothered me so much. And up until 2021, this mom was still wrecked over this.
Yeah.
Instead of us being like, here's counseling services. My wife and I went through this as well. Would you like to talk to her? Because let's be real, she needs to talk to another woman who has lost a child.
Yeah.
We said, well, not we, he said, if you want to be with your child one day, this is what you need to do. So what mom is not going to do that? I mean, she could barely walk out of that church office after that. The dad is holding her up and she is like staggering. And that was the point when Amanda and I got real with like what was happening. But that is the intensity of what we were doing to people.
Well, yeah. And I think that's an important point to talk about for a second, Brandi, is because I know in doing this podcast, it can seem like, you know, we're talking a lot about Tom and Charlotte. We're talking a lot about the church in general and the evangelical church as a whole, as in the big picture. But like, we did horrible things. And that is part of what we've had to go through in planning this podcast, is taking ownership. You said that haunted you. I'm sure all three of us have stuff that just haunts us because you said stuff and you did stuff in the name of Jesus, but really all you were doing was you were selling the Kool-Aid.
Right.
Yeah.
Because I am the one that ends up doing this funeral. I'm the one that works with the funeral director. So I have a lot of contact with this family through this as well. And I sell the mom so much garbage, and I know what she's really going through, and I don't acknowledge it. It was such the ultimate crappiest, horrific thing I could do to that woman. And I have to own the fact that no one made me do it. No one in that church made me do it. I was guzzling Kool-Aid. By that point, I'd already drank it all, actually. I'd had so much Kool-Aid that I didn't even really care anymore about the boundary that I was crossing. It was, we did what we were supposed to do. Get them in, get them baptized, get them tithing, get them serving.
Yep.
MLM.
And when you say, like, you Facebook stalked this woman, like, we all did that because you treat people so terribly, and at your core, you know what you are doing is wrong. You know that you shouldn't be doing that, but yet you're being gaslit and manipulated on all fronts that no, like, this is for the greater good and this is amazing and you're blessed and all of this stuff, and you feel so guilty. Like, there's people that I would look at on Facebook because I just wanted to make sure, like, did I really do what you wanted me to, God? Or did I completely ruin this person's life? Like, did I just completely screw them up so terribly? And it's not because of Tom. It's not because of the church. At that moment, we would do those things because you were scared to death that you missed God.
Yes.
I feel off. I feel like I did something wrong. And instead of acknowledging that you are in a toxic, controlling, abusive situation, that can't be it. Maybe I miss God somewhere. And so I need to validate the fact that, no, did God really use me?
Yeah.
Well, and then I sat and watched her come to service, and Tom would preach the same things he would preach about, you know, if you lose a child, the child's better off. He doesn't have to be in this place of sin and misery. I can't wait for Jesus to take me home. I pray for Jesus to take me home every day. And watch this mom falling apart, leaving the sanctuary, and everyone just stares at her.
Yeah, the Stedford stare.
And then I leave and I go help her she had one other child, and that's the other thing that makes this really bad on my part. She had, her oldest was my oldest's age, so there was like a 9-year gap between these kids because she had fertility issues. I had fertility issues. And so part of, like, people will say to you, like, well, you can try again and whatever. And I knew that wasn't helping her, that was making it worse. And those words never would come out of my mouth, but I never stopped anyone else. And I never kept people away from her. And that's the most of my regret, is I didn't really protect her in the way she needed to be protected. I let the spectacle happen.
Right. And, you know, you don't know, like, yeah, there's a lot of things that, like, will pop up, and I have to really evaluate, like, my role in those things and work on making amends in my own way for things. And there's definitely things that happen, like, along the way. It's like the curtain came back for little peaks, and you'd realize. And there were times when I did things that I was like, that wasn't right. So I did something to try to correct it on my own. But, like, ultimately, like, there has to be, like, systems in place, training in place, processes and procedures. And, you know, we've talked about the church that Amanda has been going to on this podcast before, but, you know, they were in a situation that came up at their church, and their church has, like, before it was even established, like, policies and procedures. How will we deal with this when this happens? Like, has your church had those conversations? Like, it blew my mind. Like, it's not until you see something functioning, you know, and it's not that this church, like, we talk about it like it's perfect. It's not perfect, and it still has people and it's still things, but, like, until you see something actually functioning like the way it's supposed to be, like having procedures in place to keep, 100 people from calling somebody who's in the middle of tragedy. That was something I was impressed with, that the church had established one contact person who would be a liaison between the person
family.
in a
Yeah.
the family and the hundreds of people that want to help, like, and just actually being real help to people instead of just a show and manipulating the situation and trying to make it work. It's almost like we have to keep up the storyline of God so much that we are willing to hurt people. We are willing to lie. We are willing to manipulate. We are willing to cheat, steal, beg, borrow, and all this other stuff to hold to the story that this church is doing something amazing.
Well, and that's 100% it. And when you said you would do something and then you would go back and try to correct it.
Yeah.
So Amanda and I, when we both are doing funerals, we overcorrect all of this stuff. And then we guard these people. And when something tragic happens and people want to bring a casserole and we're like, these people aren't going to like that, we go into overprotection mode, which also becomes a problem.
Yeah, and then you're working against the system. So now you're on this, like, it's seriously like when you watch like Guardians of the Galaxy and you and you look at the relationship between Gamora and Nebula, and you look at how they are both in this toxic abuse, I mean, like crazy insane, like the one girl's a robot because she's being like pieced apart. Like, I mean, this is happening in real life, but like you look at how one got out and the other's resentment, but it's like you can't save both. So then you have these weird like sibling dynamics of like they team up when they need to, but there'll always be somebody who throws you under the bus. And then there's somebody who's always trying to defect. And like, we could seriously come in and psychoanalyze like all of this. But it's exactly what you're saying. It's like, then you're put into a position because now you know what some things are wrong. And we have the type of personalities, obviously, that are willing to do something about it. Once we realize the clarity on the mission, we're like, oh yeah, no, I will stand up for this injustice. But we were standing up for these injustices all along the way in our own different ways, even if we were still in the process of dispensing the injustice within the Kool-Aid system. Like it's just absolutely insanity to me.
Well, and that's the thing is Brandi and I would never stand up and be like, hey, that was wrong. We shouldn't have done it that way. We would say it to each other and then we would fix it behind the scenes. But we never had the balls enough to stand up and say, no, this is screwed up and we are ruining people's lives. And so we would just fix it ourselves. And like, that's part of the problem is that we perpetuate that. So yes, Tom thinks he does things amazingly and perfect. And we know he's still preaching the same crap. And there's people even today who have lost loved ones, and Tom is basically still telling them that, you know what, I've lost my parents, I've lost a child, and, you know, I just knew that I needed to lean into God and let go and let God and, you know, move on. And I need to serve God to the best of my ability and, you know, serve the church and tithe and put on a happy face. And I know I'll see him again someday. So why is it bothering you? Why do you still grieve? And you can grieve for a minute. And like, I mean, he tells
you got 10 minutes, get it all out,
yeah.
and then let's get back and go. Come on.
I mean,
I've heard that at the church.
Yeah, I
allow myself 10 minutes to feel my feelings, and then I just get right back at it.
And the way Tom tells the story is that, you know, he stood in the hospital and held his child who had just passed away, and he broke down, but then when he walked out of that hospital room, he was magically healed from his grief because Jesus. And
it always bothered me when lean into Jesus, pick up your cross. I always would joke, wait, we were supposed to get a cross when we walked in? I didn't get my cross. Where's my cross? I need to pick up my cross. There's never any concrete way to do any of this. And the only concrete way you're given is do master life. which
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Master Life still doesn't give you anything concrete, because all it is tasks you're completing and memorizing. It's schoolwork. It's the same exact thing as do your spelling test and memorize the vocab words.
Yeah.
And you're memorizing verses, and sometimes it's hard to understand them, especially if you don't have a church background. And once you figure out that it is a stigma if you don't understand immediately and you don't become spiritually mature immediately, you will be left behind. So of course we're doing these things, because if anything's questioned, you're not looking to God. Where's your faith? And we're supposed to be helping these people because we are spiritually mature. How can you not help somebody if you're spiritually mature?
Yeah. I
But
will
it
never
takes more
forget.
than that.
Yeah, I will never forget. I had an epiphany one time, so of course I had to share it with everybody. But that's a huge verse that covers you are is deny yourself, take up your cross, and follow me, and die to yourself. All of this, like die to yourself, die to yourself. And I never forget, like the looks on people's faces, because I'm gonna tell everybody I run into, but I was like, had this epiphany. Dying hurts.
I remember you saying this.
Yeah, and I was running around, and I will never forget, somebody would, and I'm like, yeah, the lesson I'm learning right now is dying hurts. And people were like, what? And I'm like, this is the first time I've thought about it since then. I was telling people who believe in this instantaneously magical, you're going to deny yourself, you're going to follow Jesus, everything's fine. And it's going to happen instantaneous magic. God's almighty. He's powerful. You just got to deny yourself. Bam, it's fixed. It's like a magic wand. And then we wonder why people think God is a genie. But I was talking and speaking into the fact that there is a process that you go through in all of these things. And no, you don't always want to give up the things. And sometimes it just flat out sucks. Going through life just flat out sucks. And things hurt. And things devastate you, and things depress you. And there are moments when you hide in a corner, and there's times you're in a fetal position crying, and there's times that you want to die, and there's times that you want to scream and rip your hair out, and there's times that you want to murder people. But we deny humanity. And what I was speaking to in that moment is, yes, there's a process. And that process is not always happy-go-lucky. And sometimes that process hurts. And it was such a foreign concept to people that they looked at me like, huh? And then they'd kind of laugh because I thought I was being funny. But I was like, no, I'm just now realizing, yeah, we denied humanity. And we never gave people the space to be human. Burning Butterflies is a listener-supported podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by our amazing supporters on Patreon.
Follow the link in our show notes to learn how you can become a Patreon supporter too. Supporters get exclusive access to bonus content each month, including outtakes, cut content, and supporter-only episodes. If you've enjoyed this episode, please leave us a rating on your listening platform.
Burning Butterflies is a production of Asha Media. Thank you for listening.